Welcome once again to Strange Planet, and on this episode, the alien abduction phenomenon from the perspective of a long-time abductee and now author. Steve Aspen is the author of Out of Time, the Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored, and from stumbling upon a cattle mutilation in Ireland back in 1970 to witnessing a UFO after a period of missing time at the age of 16 near Chester in 1972, Steve relates a lifetime of anomalous experiences in his new book. His serious interest in this complex subject began in 2007 when he realized that the alien phenomenon was not only real, but was happening to him and had been all of his life. He spent several years researching publications on the subject, met with many of the world's leading researchers into this phenomenon, and tried his best to make sense of it all for his own peace of mind. Steve Aspen, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Good evening, Richard.
Out of Time. That's got multiple meanings, I'm guessing.
Yes, it has more than one, yes. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, let's just start off with Out of Time. I'm thinking, the missing time component, obviously.
Yes, indeed.
With the alien abduction phenomenon. Yeah. I'm wondering also, the other meaning that you decided, the timing of the book, why you decided to write it now.
Perhaps. Yes. I'm 66 years old, and I came to study this phenomenon seriously in 2007. That's be 16 years ago this year. And by about 2012 or 2013 or 2014, I'd made my peace with it and realized this was actually a reality and it had been happening to me all my life. And I just wanted to leave it and try and live a normal life, which to some extent I was successful in doing. I had a couple of health scares over the past 3 or 4 years, and my wife and other people close to me persuaded me to get out and dust off most of the manuscripts I had written several years ago, and I started on writing the book properly 12 months ago this week, actually, and finished it in May, and we went to editing and we published on the 12th of September. So this is, I've finally become a published author at age 66. And you're right, Out of Time. I wanted to make sure that I didn't run out of time before publishing the book. The book's title also refers to the fact that the central thesis of the book is that we might be running out of time to understand this phenomenon, because I think it's more serious and has greater implications for humanity than most people give it credit for.
Let's just dive right in and talk about the key event. 1972, you're, 16?
Yes, this was what many abductees have, something like this that they term a trigger event. And you have a number of experiences. Abductees lead weird lives. They have strange things happen to them. They get drawn to the spirit world and the occult. They have strange phobias about things. They sometimes feel they're special. They lack self-confidence. There's a whole range of things that I talk about at length in chapter 3 to how abductees can be identified or can identify themselves. But something happens to some abductees, maybe a significant minority, that a single event that after which they can't really persuade themselves that this phenomenon is not happening to them. And this happened to me in 1972. I was 16 years old, and I was working on an agricultural nursery for the summer between summer and the school and higher education college. And I worked throughout July and August and into early September. And on the 22nd of July, I had a strange compulsion that the following Saturday morning, I was to get up and go somewhere. It sounds very bizarre for me to tell you this now, but when I was 16 years old in 1972, it's just something that was in my mind. oh, a Saturday morning, I'll go somewhere. Um, I'll just get up and go out. I'm I'm sure it'd be interesting. And Saturday morning, it was the only day of the week I didn't work because I worked 5 days plus Sundays, which was, we were paid double on Sundays for a short day. So Saturday was the only day I actually didn't work, and therefore I was free all day long. So at 6:15 in the morning, 5:45 a.m., I got up and went out and walked about a mile or so away from our house in a suburban neighborhood, and arrived at a site where new houses were being built, and there was nobody around, especially at that time in the morning. As it was bright, sunny July morning, it was the 22nd of July, 1972, and suddenly I had a flash, and I looked at my watch, and it was 8:15. Oh, 8:05, sorry, 8:05. So 2 hours and 20 minutes had just vanished. And I was surrounded by blue and indigo flashing lights in the blue and indigo part of the color spectrum all around me, and weird bleeping and whooshing noises, and a voice in my head which seemed to be nearby, but I couldn't see or hear anybody, a voice in my head was telling me, "You're going to forget about everything that happened this morning. You won't remember anything. All that we've done this morning, you'll forget about it. So off you go." And I looked through an aperture in the wall, this is part built brand new house. So in the wall there was a big rectangle where one of the window frames was to be fitted, but it was just open to the sky with no glass and no window frames. And through that hole in the wall, I saw a flying saucer about 30 meters above the ground, about 100 meters away, quite large. And it was hovering, and it was drifting slowly from the left to right of my vision. And that seemed to be, at first, I just thought it was a random sighting of an unidentified flying object, which I'd never had before, though I'd read about them. And I suddenly, bang, everything was back to normal. All the lights were gone, the colors were gone, the sound whooshing sounds in my head were gone, and the object was gone. And I just thought, okay, I'll walk home now. And what the hell was that about? And as I was walking home, I felt this part of my cheek, just below the eye socket, felt wet and hot. And I wiped it away, and it returned. And I got home and looked in the bathroom mirror, and I had a perfectly round mark on this cheek, the size of a large coin, and it was like a burn mark, and it was weeping. And it took it took 3 months to heal. It scabbed over within a day or so, but it was rough to the touch for several weeks after that, and took a full 3 months to heal. So that was a physical mark of this event that I could never explain. And strangely, I basically ignored it. I pretended it wasn't there. And I was a bit embarrassed about having experienced this thing, which made no sense at all in 1972 in the English provinces. There was no hook to hang it on. The idea of abduction by aliens and a flying saucer was something that was absolutely not in a public discourse in any way. This was a day where we had, I think, 3 television channels, network television channels. There was no satellite TV. There was no cable TV. There was no internet. So people's exposure to these kind of things was maybe a very small minority of the population were interested in the UFO subject, or were interested in the paranormal, and they maybe bought magazines or something. And, a very small number of people might have heard of the Hill case in the United States, which was in 1961. Mm-hmm. And John Fuller's book was published in 1966. Basically, apart from that, I don't think anybody knew anything about this. So I had no meaning to put on this. I had no understanding of what happened to me at all.
So this is a triggering event, but in the book you talk about prior to that, even
Yeah.
as a younger
Yeah.
child.
Before that, I had nighttime incidents like night terrors, which a number of kids have, with being handled by little creatures and pulled around and uh, paralyzed. That there's the way they have a way of shutting down the neurological systems of your body, so you can't physically resist them. Although you're mostly conscious and you can move your eyeballs. And I'd had those regularly through my childhood, every several weeks from about age 5. And I could never, I could just, I just thought it's something that happened to some kids. Um, my I asked my grandmother about them. Well, excuse me, I'll step back a piece. I discovered you can actually communicate with these creatures, these abductors, because they talk to you in your mind, which people who have no familiarity with this phenomenon find it a bizarre concept and, a magical, unbelievable. Everything about this is highly improbable and highly unlikely against our normal cultural and scientific paradigms. But you can talk to them in your mind, and they hear you and they can respond. And you hear them in your head, and it's very definitely coming from the one you're talking to. It's not some invention. And I asked him, why are you doing this to me? Why me? What's particular about me? And he said, into my mind, he said, oh, it's because of your mother and your grandmother and your great grandmother, and you're next in the line, and you have no choice about this. Effectively, words to that effect. And the next time I met with my grandmother, which was several weeks after that, when I was about 11 years old, this was 1966, 67, I asked her about this very hesitantly when the two of us were alone sitting by the fireside. Everybody else was out. And I asked her about these night experiences. And she said, oh, Stevie, they're just the pixies. They'll always bring you back. Don't worry. And she basically, she probably thought that it happened to all kids, and or certainly most kids, and you just had to wait for the child to ask about this, and you could just explain to them that they were the pixies, that there's a fairy world, and they don't harm you, and they always return you back. They take you away and they bring you back. And she was brought up. She was born in 1908, and she's brought up in on a farm in West Yorkshire, and she had only very basic school education to age 14, and she'd never been to high college or anything, and she'd never moved out of the area. So she had a very, very simple and straightforward framework for it, which was the folklore of the local area. And I always assumed that's what it was to do with. And I never connected these experiences to the UFO abduction phenomenon. It was only later that it became obvious to me that it was the same thing that was going on.
When you're telling this narrative in Out of Time,
yeah,
you don't talk about recovered memory. You don't talk about what happened during the missing time. You talk about you tell the story from your working memory.
Yes.
Why did you not include what you later discovered under hypnosis?
Because I wanted to convey to the reader what it's basically. I think the idea of somebody undergoing hypnosis to recover memories is a little bit controversial with some people. Some people believe that hypnosis is a sham, or the hypnotist can put things in people's minds. My experience of it, I talk about in chapter 7. But my experience of accessing the long-term memory. I didn't include that part of it in the main narrative because I wanted to avert any criticism of that hypnosis was the result of all these of the origin of all these experiences, which is not. The other thing is I wanted to convey to people what I experienced in full conscious memory throughout my childhood and adolescence and young adulthood. And there were certain events that just happened to me, and often other people were present at the time. And these events I recall, in sequence. And I wanted to say that basically this is what I and other people remember, and this is what happened to us, or this is what happened to me. And these normal memories before, without any kind of hypnosis, without any kind of hypnotic assistance to recover the memories, these are what led me to look into this issue and decide to explore it.
There was also a period in your life when you experienced nosebleeds, like consistent nosebleeds.
Yeah, when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. And they were, this is not unusual for abductees, particularly children, because the abductors are known to implant things in the head, in various places in the head and in other parts of the body as well. But the primary target for them is the cribriform plates, where the olfactory nerve enters the brain, which is right at the top of the nasal pharynx. And when they put implants in there, they're tiny little things the size of a grain of sand or a little tiny seed. And they have an extremely interesting construction. But at the time, none of us knew anything about this. But when they implant them, occasionally, or sometimes often, because it does vary from abductee to abductee, and it does probably vary by the skill and technique of the alien that's doing it, because they're not all of equal ability or equal experience. But these things go into this area in the nose, and nosebleeds. Kids wake up with nosebleeds on the pillow. In my case, I used to my nose used to start bleeding in the classroom in the middle of lessons, dripping on the page, and I'd have to try and hold it back, and sometimes it was both nostrils at the same time. And the school asked my parents to come in and talk about this, and they took me to the GP and to an ENT specialist, who really didn't diagnose anything of significance. I can't remember if he actually gave me any medicine for it, which, I mean, I don't think anything would have worked, but I just don't remember anything practical being offered as a solution. I think they were just told, my parents were just told, he will grow out of it, quote unquote, which is actually what happened. I did grow out of it. And, but nosebleeds were common, were unusually common with me, and very troublesome between 7 and 9 years old.
Is that around the same time that you also started to exhibit, I don't want to use the word irrational, but a tremendous...
There's nothing rational about this.
No, a tremendous fear of medical procedures.
Yeah, well, I'd always had that from infancy. And I used to scream when I was having inoculations and so on, because smallpox was still a thing when I was a child, and poliomyelitis was in the population within living memory. I had one kid in my classroom, as an example, my school class, that had polio because he'd not been vaccinated as a child. So these terrible diseases were still around, and kids were vaccinated against them. And I used to scream and yell at any idea of a needle being put in me, or being in any way medically interfered with. And I had to work hard at this as an adult. I joined the medical device industry, and I later founded a surgical innovations company when I was in my 40s, which was very successful. But I took a lot of struggle to get through those barriers, and I couldn't watch a surgical procedure in the operating department for several years without keeling over and fainting. And it took an awful lot of exposure and practice and toughening myself up to deal with that. Yeah.
And did you discover that was related to the insertion of these implants, or through recovered memory?
Well, I had the memories from infancy of being immobilized and manipulated like this. And I think it was probably the phobia probably originates there, which is very common with psychological phobias, is psychiatric diseases, as you know. So I think that's probably the origin of it. Yeah.
What about the fear of snakes that you had? I mean, a lot of kids have fear of snakes, but yours.
Yeah, they do, which is weird, because the British Isles has very few native serpent species, only 3, and only 1 is common. But I was absolutely terrified of them. Yeah.
And
some abductees have fear of large insects or spiders, and some have fear of snakes, and some have other fears of that kind. They get phobias. They're extremely fearful of heights as well. Some abductees. In my case, not so much. But snakes, I was really terrified of. Whenever we went to the zoo in the snake house, I was shaking with fear all the time. And I don't know what that's to do with it, apart from the abductors actually look a little bit reptilian, and they have no hair on their bodies, and they have these big eyes, and particularly the small serpents have the way they move. When I was a little kid, for about a year, I was terrified of snakes in the bed, and I think that was probably caused by the little grey's fingers getting hold of my ankles now and again. And I think that was where that phobia came from, so far as I know. Yeah.
So you're part of, again, this intergenerational abduction program. Let's talk about the word program.
Yeah.
If it is a program and it's intergenerational, for what purpose?
Well, we don't know, because they don't tell us. And I speculate about this in the later chapters of the book. All we know is they do work down generational lines. And I think the evidence that the program started between 1890 and 1900 is quite strong. And I bring a lot of evidence to the table in chapter. You have read the book, yeah?
Yes.
The chapter 8, when I talk about the intergenerational side of it.
Well, just yeah, go ahead. Just lay it out. I mean, I know it's a fairly in-depth discussion about why 1890 to 1900, but just give us a sense of why you believe it happened.
What the age of the program? I think this program is carried out on generational lines of people. Often it's all or more than one child of either the mother or the father can be the abductee. And then in the second generation, again, either one or more children become abductees, and the third generation and so forth. I'm the 4th generation. And I was told this, as I've already recounted, at about age 10, when I asked one of these abductors, why me? Why are you doing this to me? And it was explained to me, it's because of your mother and your grandmother and your great-grandmother. That's why you're next in line. And this seems to be a universal pattern. People who've researched this subject, such as John Mack, Bud Hopkins, Dave Jacobs, Ray Fowler, all these American researchers and people all over the world have looked into this. Anybody who's researched family lines or dealt with the parents and their children knows that this is part of the phenomenon. Abductees who do not have either a parent and a grandparent and a great grandparents in this program are extremely rare. A one-offs like maybe Travis Walton, I'll talk about his case, and maybe the Allagash case. There was one of the four Allagash guys in the Allagash abduction, and maybe Barney Hill. If you know that,
Yes,
most of your audience will know the Betty and Barney Hill case. It seems to me that Barney was not in the program, that was not in an intergenerational program, but his wife Betty was, and they were taken as a pair on that one occasion. But do you want to go into the reasons why why I think the program started in 1990? Or
yes, yeah, but we'll do that. I'll just take a quick time out, and
Yeah.
we'll get to that. Steve Aspen, the author of Out of Time, the Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the most profound health, athletic, and anti-aging discoveries of our lifetime, and we need the world to know about it. If you want to learn more about ASEA, visit strangeplanet.teamasea.com, strangeplanet.teamasea.com, and be sure to text or call my colleague and friend Lynn at 443-254-6024, 443-254-6024 to order or for additional information. ASEA Redox Supplement. It's truly wellness redefined. We're back with Steve Aspen. The book is Out of Time, the Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. And you mentioned in the book you believe the program began in 1890 or between 1890 and 1900. And how did you arrive at that?
I have, because all the researchers who looked into this program have discovered that it is intergenerational, and there are several generations. In my case, I know that I was told at age 10 that it was because of your mother, your grandmother, and your great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was born in 1873. So by 1890, she was 17. And that's the primary, the start of the fertile years for a woman. And I've met a number of other abductees that know something about their great-grandparents, and they were all born about that time in the 1880s, 1870s to 1890s, and they were all young adults in the 1890s. There's one particular account in the book in chapter 9, which I recount about an abductee I know who lives in Turkey, who's a well-known researcher, Farah Yurdozu, and she writes about her great-grandmother, her great-grandfather, who was called Emin Refik, and this is in her book, Confessions of a Turkish Ufologist, is in chapter 1, and I quote a chunk of the text out of there, that this man was, during the 1890s, he was a teacher at Istanbul University, a young teacher, and his early 20s. And he was confronted at night by two large reptilian entities who paralyzed him and spoke to him telepathically in his mind. And there's a whole load of stuff there, but they're the main indicators. And at the end of the encounter, he was told, from you to 3 generations. So, and she says, was Emin Refik abducted? Was this an alien abduction, ? Because these reptilian entities were, they're unusual to be reported in abduction narratives. But very early in the program, as I have speculate with some evidence that they were the predominant servants of the abducting entities that carried out the abductions early in the program, and that the gray aliens that most people see in popular culture as the aliens, you know, whether it's the South Park episode or whether it's the Steven Spielberg's The Close Encounters of the Third Kind film, they all have this morphology, you know, the skinny morphology gray alien with a very slight body, the big bulbous head, the huge eyes. I think they are genetically created entities. They're created by the abducting aliens that are not those creatures. They're others. But I believe the reptilian entities were recruited or used for the early part of the abduction program, and I go into this in a lot more depth in chapter 9 in the book.
You estimate somewhere between 150 to 400 million abductees worldwide. Is that based at all on the Roper poll that was commissioned by Bud Hopkins and David James?
That's one of the few significant data points that we have. I wish somebody could be encouraged to carry out a similar poll now, but the thing is, in the 1890s, the abduction narrative wasn't known that recognized that much. So, and you know, we didn't have the internet so much in the early 1990s. So that poll, in some ways, was fortuitous in its timing, in that the global population of the Roper polls in the United States were unfamiliar with the concept of abduction. So you could ask them questions like, you know, question 1, have you ever woken up with a strange figure in the room? Question 2, have you ever felt you were flying through the air, like you were going up an elevator? You know, question 3, things like this. And the recipients, the respondents would have no idea what the questions were about. Whereas now they might kind of twig that this is, all these questions are to do with the one thing, but they were structured in the poll by the question, the pollsters, like Robert Bigelow, I think, financed it, didn't he? And
Ron, I'm not sure.
Ron Westrom, who's a sociologist from Michigan University, was heavily involved in it as well. So I think that's a prime data point. If you ask the abductors, how many abductees are there? I've asked them a couple of times, how many abductees are there? Is it 1 in 50 or is it 1 in 20? How many are there? And they always tell you something like that, or they say it's a very large number, because you know they probably don't know actually the entities that are dealing with us probably don't actually know themselves, because it's not part of their job description, but they know it's a very large number.
I just want to go back to that triggering event for you, because something just occurred to me that, you know, this was on a Saturday morning. I think this was the whole reason you brought this up, that it was the one day when you're not working. So obviously they know when you won't be missed.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? They do. They know exactly when to come and get you. And I don't really understand how they know this, but they do know. They can they do these staring procedures where they can look into an abductee's eye from very close range when the abductee is immobilized, lying down on the table, and they can twist and turn their heads so that they lock into the optic nerve, and they can travel down and read all your memories, and travel into the genticulate body of the brain and read all your memories, and even rearrange them and implant memories which bypass the normal retinal observations and so forth. So they probably do, you know, if they were they'd abducted me during those weeks prior to that, they probably knew that I was available on Saturday morning, or would not be missed. The whole point is the abductees not missed. So that's why so many abductions reported to happen at night, when the abductee is asleep. And if they're sleeping on their own or sleeping with a partner, the partner is basically is knocked out, mentally, so that they never wake up. And the abductee just wakes up in the morning and feels they've had weird dreams and they feel really tired all day, but they have no memory of what happened. And so they obviously know when to get people. Our abductees are sometimes abducted from motor vehicles. There's a lot of cases of them being abducted from cars, but obviously the Travis Walton case and the Hill case and so forth. And there's a number of other cases in the literature where people stop when they see a bright light in the sky. They stop and to get a better look at it, and suddenly it's 2 hours later, and the light is gone, or it's receding into the distance, and they've somehow lost 2 hours of time. So they know. Again, there's no witnesses basically, so they do know when they can take you, when you won't be missed. I don't know how, all the ways they know this, but they do know.
When we come back, we'll talk about, I think it was 1997 in Buckinghamshire. I believe you were taken from a car. Back with that story. In mere moments, Steve Aspen, Out of Time. What would it feel like to reclaim your health, your vitality, to sleep deeply, to live fully, to address health at the root, at the cellular level, so that your body can detect damage where you have it? Imagine living younger, longer, having the energy to do what you want to do when you want to do it. Discomfort fading away. ASEA Redox Supplement harnesses the power of your body to heal itself, giving you the ability to power your potential. This is one of the most profound health, athletic, and anti-aging discoveries of our lifetime, and we need the world to know about it. If you want to learn more about ASEA, visit strangeplanet.teamasea.com, strangeplanet.teamasea.com, and be sure to text or call my colleague and friend Lynn at 443-254-6024, 443-254-6024 to order or for additional information. ASEA Redox Supplement. It's truly wellness redefined. Steve Aspen is with us, and the book is Out of Time, the Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored, with a foreword by Don Derry.
Yes. Fellow Canadian.
Yes, Montreal, I believe. I've spoken to Don previously. So 1997, you're in Buckinghamshire. You're in the car, and it seems like your abductors I don't know, messed up a little bit. You didn't return the same way exactly.
Yeah. This was prior to my acknowledging that this phenomenon was going on with me, because I didn't really know much about it. I'd read Whitley Strieber's Communion when he released the book in 1987, because it was very heavily and successfully promoted by his publishing company, and he was doing the chat show circuit in the UK. And the book was in all the bookstores with this incredibly enigmatic, memorable image on the cover and so forth. So I read that, and I knew a little bit about the abduction phenomenon, but in 97, I didn't really know much about it. I set off from a business meeting. For those of you who know the geography of Southeast England, the business meeting I had was in Reading in Berkshire. And I had to go to Amersham to meet what you would call a realtor in the United States, was an estate agent. We refer to that in England. I think the meeting was about 6 o'clock, 6:30. And I set off down a road I hadn't used very often, because I hadn't traveled between these two towns from one to the other very often, but I did know the route. And it was eerily quiet for peak period, a traffic period in Southeast England, which we still got a population of 25 million. And it's really, really, normally the Thames Valley is really, really busy, really traffic clogged. But this road I was on, it's really, really quiet. There was almost nobody on it. And the sun was in the sky, but it was low in the sky, because I think it was March time. And So it would have been set about 6:30, maybe 7 o'clock in the evening. And I all I remember about this journey was I remember a vehicle appeared to be coming in the opposite direction with very bright lights. It was like a truck or some large vehicle. It looked like I couldn't see the wheels. I could just see this bright lights got bigger and bigger. And the next thing I remember, I was driving into Amersham in a queue of traffic, and it was 7:30. So I left Reading at 5 to take a journey which should take an hour, and it was 7:30. And I thought, how did I? Where's the time gone? Well, what was where? I did I take a detour? What? This is completely mystery as to what happened, And I obviously missed the meeting with the realtor, and who didn't seem to phone me, and probably waiting for me to phone her. And the premises were locked up, so I just drove home. When I got home, I discovered that the buttons of my shirt were misaligned. Now, I wore a shirt and tie. I wouldn't go out like this, and I obviously I would have noticed, and other people would have noticed, because I've been in a business meeting all day. And they were misaligned by one button, and I think a couple of the lower buttons weren't done up. And also, a cherished piece of jewelry I had, the only one I actually wore around my neck, was missing. And I thought, that's strange. Did I maybe not put it on this morning? And I looked for it all around the house, and it wasn't there, and I never found it. And I never took it off in the daytime. The chain was very robust, and it was never on display because it was under my shirt, and it never turned up. And it was only later, when I started to investigate the abduction phenomenon, that I realized that I was part of it. That I discovered that this occasionally happens with abductees, that they are returned with their earrings on backwards so that the posts and clasps are reversed, or a piece of jewelry or clothing is missing, or something is tied up wrong, or the shoelaces are tied up wrong. These things occasionally happen to abductees that have daytime abductions. And in my case, I lost this piece of jewelry, and had my clothing wasn't put on right afterwards. So I must have been taken on that road.
There's some pictures in the book. I think these are pictures of injuries, scarring, scoop marks.
Yes.
You came out of a shower, I think, on one occasion. Was it your wife that spotted this unusual
sure.
mark on your shoulder?
I'm married to the lady now. She's been my wife for a number of years, but in 2008, we weren't married, but we were together. And I came out of the shower, and she sort of exclaimed and said, Steve, that mark on your shoulder, I've seen that in books about alien abductions," which she was reading up on the subject as well by that time. And she said, "I think they're called scoop marks, and you've got one on your shoulder." And I can, it was on the right shoulder, and it was behind. It's behind where I could see. Usually they're placed where abductees themselves can't see them. So behind the calves, or behind the knees, or the thigh, or behind the shoulder blade. And occasionally they're in more visible positions, like on the front of the thighs and so forth. And she photographed them and sent them to a couple of abduction researchers she'd met at UFO conferences in the United States, or she knew of. Like, she knew Stephen Bassett. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yes, many times.
She was fairly friendly with him, and she talked to him a few times, and he'd introduced her to David Jacobs, who at that time I didn't know any of these people. And she sent them to the only person I've met at a conference was Peter Robbins, that I met in Atlantic City at a MUFON conference, and we'd exchange address details and so forth. And Peter got the photographs and he took them to Bud Hopkins. This was in September 2008. And Bud Hopkins, fortuitously, Breakthrough Films were making a film about Bud Hopkins's work with abductees. And because Breakthrough Films were an award-winning independent film company based in Manhattan, a couple of streets away from where Bud lived in West 16th Street. And they were making this movie about Bud's work. And they were interested in finding a couple of scoop mark scars that were fresh, never been photographed before, never been in the public domain before, had not appeared in books or in conferences and so forth, just fresh marks for some reason. And this was really fortuitous timing, because he saw this mark on my shoulder, this photograph, so this mark on my shoulder. Peter Robbins gave him my telephone number, address details, and my name. And he phoned me up in my Hertfordshire house one evening and asked if I'd go over to Manhattan, and I could stay in his apartments, and he'd vacate it for the duration, so we could have the apartment to ourselves, and on condition that we would be interviewed by Breakthrough Films, and the scar would be biopsied at a Manhattan dermatopathology clinic, which happened on the 11th of December. So that's how we came to meet Bud Hopkins and get to know him. Because of this scoop mark scar on my shoulder that my wife saw, which I wouldn't have seen, because I don't look at the back of my shoulder and my back in the mirror, very often.
Right.
Very few people do. I would not have seen it if it weren't for her. And she noticed it and photographed it and sent the photographs off. And it initiated this chain of events, which led to me getting to know Bud Hopkins extremely well, actually, in the last 3 years of his life. And I spent a lot of time with him.
By that time, he wasn't doing the work anymore. Did he refer you to Dr. David Jacobs?
Yes, he was really slowing down because he'd a number of serious health conditions, and you may know he died in August 2011. Mm-hmm. But he phoned David Jacobs up, who a close friend of his in Philadelphia, and we went down to Philly for the day from Penn Street Station in Manhattan, and we met Dave Jacobs. And I spent several hours with him and his wife, and just talking about his work and looking around his studio and his library and so forth. And he offered to work with me on my experiences there and then. And that initiated 7 years of work with David Jacobs, which was, the most, it was the most helpful and useful experience in retrospect. And we still talk, although he's retired now from Temple University. He's retired from work on the abduction subject. He's over 80, and he lives in a different part of the country now. He's left Philadelphia, but we still talk fairly often. Yeah.
At what point did you connect with Dr. Roger Lear?
I met Roger at a conference organized by Stephen Bassett in Gaithersburg, Maryland in 2009. I met Roger, and we had a dialogue, a long distance dialogue for 2 or 3 years. He was trying to get a UFO magazine going, which I really didn't keep up with. That's what he talked to me about mostly. But I was talking to him about his work, and you may know that he'd removed 19 of these implants from abductees in the 18 years or so that he was engaged with this. Yeah. Oh, sorry. He was 19 years he was engaged in the endeavor of removing implants from abductees, and he removed 18 objects, of which 17 were exotic and 1 was prosaic.
You recently, I'm not sure how recently, but this is still ongoing, right? You recently, did you not cough up a Would you believe it was an implant?
Yeah, in February last year,
Mm.
nearly a year ago now, and I didn't know what it was. I had a cold, fairly heavy cold last winter, not related to COVID-19 at all, but I had a couple of violent sneezes, and then I coughed something up into the bathroom wash basin, and it was what came out was a blood clot, which I didn't expect. It's quite worrying, you know. You cough up a big blood clot for out of your lungs, but only that one, and nothing to follow. Nothing followed on either that day or the next day or subsequently, and it was a big clot. And in the middle of this clot was a little object, a little hard bit, and um, I was so possessed with getting rid of it that maybe I was, you know, I told myself that I didn't want my wife to see that I was coughing up blood because she's, you know, prone to worry about such things. So I thought I'd flush it down the wash basin, and maybe there wouldn't be another one. There wouldn't be more, you know, of the expert the blood coming out. So I was fanatically washed it down the wash basin with about a gallon of water, and I felt better having done that. And it was only in the next morning that I'd noticed my nostrils were still bleeding, and blood was running out. Had been running out onto the pillow overnight, and they bled for 24 hours, not prolifically, but quite a little bit all the time.
They replaced it.
And
Is that what you're saying? They
yes,
replaced it.
well, they replaced it about 6 or 7 weeks later.
Ah,
And I know this because the initial bleeding ended after 24 hours, and 6 weeks went by. I discussed whether this might have been an implant with Robert Hastings, who, you know, is do you know? I don't know if you've
yeah, I've
interviewed
talked to
Robert.
him about nuclear UFOs over nuclear
Yes,
sites.
you
Yes.
know he's also written a book with Bob Jacobs called Confession
No.
about his abduction experiences.
No.
Yes, he's written a book about his abduction experiences because he's a lifetime abductee as well. At the time he published in 2019, I discouraged him to go about going public about his abduction experiences because I felt it might jeopardize his legitimacy as a serious nuts and bolts researcher of the UFOs and nukes issue, which is
Mm.
world famous for.
Yes.
But nonetheless, he went ahead and published. And I think in retrospect, he was right and I was wrong about that. I think that was the right thing for him to do. But I discussed this implant with him, and we speculated on what it might have been. And I couldn't recover it because we've got a septic tank, and which is almost like, you know, having a mains linked sewage system.
Right.
There's no possibility of finding it in there. And 6 weeks later, I was my dog was really nervous and jumpy, unusually so, because he's normally a really good sleeper and he's really good at night. And he wouldn't settle, and he wouldn't settle, and he wouldn't settle. And finally, my wife got him to settle after about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I woke up the next day with very high blood pressure. I've suffered from hypertension, but it's managed these days, and it's really normal, you know, when it's managed. But this particular morning, it's really high, and I felt very irritable and weird. And I noticed that my nostrils were bleeding again. This was about 6 or 7 weeks. It was in April after the thing was expelled. So I'm assuming that they put it back, or they implanted another one in the same place, because that explains the dog's anxiety and the reason why I felt so angry and irritable, and it explains the bleeding nostrils. I think it's likely that they replace it on that occasion.
Out of Time, the intergenerational abduction program explored. Final question, Steve, and that is we talked about the multiple meanings behind the title Out of Time. You mentioned your own mortality, you mentioned the missing time aspect. There's also the message for the rest of us, which is we're running out of time. Just talk to me a little bit about that. What do you mean?
I think the abductors are working at some program that they're genetically changing their subjects in subtle ways. I don't know what they're doing. And I think our genetic scientists probably wouldn't even detect it. It's very, very subtle. I think it's to do with some of your audience will have heard about the hybrid breeding program, which is a fantastic little thing, which I talk about in the book a little bit in chapter 5. I have a chapter devoted to it. The book, by the way, is a fairly basic level of introduction to the abduction.
Yeah, it's a real primer. Subject. It's a primer for sure.
Yeah, primer, sure. And I don't go into the alleged hybrid integration program, which is fairly ubiquitous on the internet if you know where to look for it. But I think the abductors are running a program with a beginning, a middle, and a concluding end. And I think that we're way past the middle point now. And I think that it's because the medical fraternity in the Western world basically ignores and disregards the experiences of abductees and the forensic and scientific evidence and of the bodily scarring and so forth. And people report very consistently what happens to them. It is largely disregarded by the scientific community and the medical community around the world. I think we've passed the time when we can do anything about it, which I think we may have been able to do maybe 20 or 30 years ago. I think we're beyond that time. And now, doesn't matter what we do, we can't do anything about where we're headed. And I don't speculate about where we're headed. I know some people do, but I think these abductors who are running this gigantic program on millions of people, it's covert, it's intergenerational, it's consistent. They've invested in enormous amount of resources into it. They can take people invisibly. They can ensure they're not seen. The abductions are not witnessed. They're very, very rarely witnessed. Not never, but very, very rarely. And I think basically it's an extremely successful covert program to do whatever they're doing. And I think the Out of Time title is largely referring to that.
How do we get out of time into as many hands as possible? Direct people.
If you go on your local Amazon site, you can find it. Google, put into Amazon Out of Time, Steve Aspin. Or if you go to the web pages, outoftimebook.info. That's outoftimebook, one word, .info. There are direct links to Amazon.com and to Amazon.co.uk. Unfortunately, not to the Canadians. There's no direct link to the Canadian site, but it's very easy to find the book on Amazon. And it's available as a paperback of 300 pages or as an ebook. And with the ebook, you get all the illustrations are in color and all the graphs and charts are in color. And of course, all the links for the notes and references work right off the page if you're reading the ebook.
And that outoftimebook.info, the link is in the episode notes here as well. So just click on that. Steve, thank you so much for spending some time.
It's been a pleasure, Richard. Thank you.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.